Welcome to Representation Without Taxation with Jill McBride Baxter, a veteran sports law attorney for the past 30 years and certified NFLPA contracted.
I'm about three things: protection, advocacy, and trust.
Not only is Jill an attorney, she's the daughter of a college football coach and the wife of a college football coach, and she knows all of the issues from all angles. This is Representation Without Taxation, a one-of-a-kind show featuring critically relevant material for contract employees in sports.
Hi, this is the third episode on House versus the NCAA. This particular episode is organized in the following way. One, I first re-explain exactly what the House settlement is. And today, what we're going to talk about with my students from McGeorge School of Law is the fair market value of a student athlete in the NIL space. We also are going to talk a little bit about Title IX. So if you haven't listened to the previous two episodes, you might want to go back and listen to those two episodes, because in those episodes we talk about how to increase revenue in your athletics department under the House case. We defined the word booster, and we also took a deep dive into the new arbitration system under the House case and whether it's going to work. But this week we're going to talk about fair market value after I re-explain the entire settlement.
I am thrilled to have my class, Sports Law in Practice, here with me to solve the implementation of the House versus the NCAA settlement. I'm going to explain to my listeners right now that here is what the settlement ended up being, although it still has not been confirmed by Judge Wilkins. That is supposed to happen in April. I want to be clear about that to my listeners. But here's what the settlement is. Former athletes will receive $2.78 billion in back pay over a 10-year period. This is primarily for athletes who played between 2016 and 2021. Be able to share up to 22% of their athletic media, ticket, and sponsorship revenue with their student athletes. This could result in schools sharing between $20 million and $30 million with their athletes. Schools are not required to participate, but if they do, they must share with all athletes in their department. 75%, this is what the settlement says, 75% is recommended to go to football, 20% is men's and women's basketball, 5% is going to other athletes. Just so people are clear, and my listeners are clear, this is a permissive suggestion. It is not required. So schools can choose whether or not they want to share revenue with their athletes. The third part of the settlement is NIL deals. NIL deals will be questioned on associated entities and individuals, and they must be approved through a third-party clearinghouse. And an arbitrator will determine whether there is a valid business purpose or pay-for-play schemes that are disguised as NIL agreements. There's a lot of controversy surrounding this, whether this is going to work, and we're going to talk. Other part of it is schools will now be able to enter into NIL deals directly with student athletes with some limitations. This is, again, back to the arbitration. If it's over $600, it will be subject to a third-party arbitrator to determine whether the deal is fair market value or pay for play. We are going to talk today about what fair market value means or pay for play. That is a huge debate right now going on all over the country. What does that exactly mean? The other part of the settlement that many student athletes are not happy with is the roster limits. The NCAA will adopt new roster limits which will replace scholarship limits. For example, football will have 105 roster spots, men's and women's basketball will have 15, and baseball will have 34. So roster limits are, again, part of this settlement. The timeline for the settlement is on October 18th, 2024. Former players were notified of the decision and the claim period began. On December 17th,
The amount
distributed will be publicly available. On January 31st is the deadline for people to submit claims, opt in, or bring objections. On April 7th, the court will hear the final approval. if the final approval goes through in July of 2025. Okay, the next part that we're going to talk about is what actually is fair market value when it comes to NIL deals and also collectives. So I've got 4 people that are going to talk about that. Which group wants to go first, and what do you want to talk about first?
My name is Jennifer.
Okay, Jennifer?
And I guess I just wanted to start with how fair market value of student athletes is something that is not defined at all anywhere and has never been. But there are a lot of talks or discussions online by how you could figure out a proper way to, to kind of give a reason for a number that someone would pay a player or give to a player in order for them to be part of their team. But they look at a lot of different factors.
Okay.
Like performance is a big one, obviously. There was an article online that talked about collecting data on their athletes' performance, their marketability, and then what kind of impact they have economically. That is kind of, it's hard because you have to put a lot of resource into that, and I think there's a lot of people that may look at those things, but it doesn't tell the whole picture of an athlete. So they also compare athletes in similar colleges and then professional athletes, but that isn't exactly definitive.
But if you're doing performance, isn't that pay for play?
Yeah, but then it's also their influence on their community. So.
Their performance influences the community, and therefore performance does matter, but you're saying it's not pay for play.
That's where the discussions get really confusing because
Yes.
It basically is pay for play, but they don't want to call it pay for play. It has to be fair market value. And if you can count the performance, the influence, and then what kind of exposure the student athlete has, then it'll be easier to give a more valid value to a student athlete. But at the end of the day, it really depends on how much someone is willing to offer and then what the student athlete is willing to receive in order to transfer or make a decision on where to play.
Yeah,
Okay.
my name is also Zach,
Okay.
and I think that's the trickiest part in all of this is, like, going through all the articles and doing all the research that I did, the hardest thing was adjusting for context. And I think that's the most difficult part, because you can take, how many, followers they have on Instagram, Twitter, whatnot, how successful they are at their sport. However, there are, like, unique traits to certain individuals that can make them more valuable than others in terms of how, prone they are to being in the community, being on social media. Some people can have a lot of followers but don't post a lot. And then on top of that, like, how well the athletic department at that school does at marketing that player. So that has been the trickiest part I think in trying to create like a uniform way of determining the fair market value of individual players, because, a quarterback at school A could be viewed, as this price, but putting him in a completely different state, in a completely different fan base, could be worth less or more depending on how much they care for the quarterback. And so it just kind of, that's been the trickiest part, I would say, is just figuring out.
So if you're an arbitrator, how are you going to determine whether somebody is receiving fair market value, whether it's a valid business purpose as opposed versus pay for play?
I mean,
what are things that you could look at?
I mean, the parts of that are like, I mean, obviously you can look at like awards. I mean, the Heisman Award is a big, that's like the holy grail. But that's one way you can, determine how much a Heisman Award winner has. There's I'm sure there are algorithms that can, say how much that's worth to an individual school, and maybe it's worth a little bit more to one school and a little less to another school. that could be one way. I mean, the best basis is probably comparison. There are some algorithms that compare professional athletes to amateur athletes. It's a little difficult because you have to subtract that professional status from them. But that, I mean, there are a couple ways. There are comparing an athlete's performance and marketability and economic impact. I mean, you can go to third-party institutions that can try to go and figure things out like that as well. But it's hard to put like a stamp of like this scientifically or like this is exactly how much. And so I find it could be difficult for an arbitrator to do something like that.
The context also includes like the student's background. So maybe they know that maybe they're really involved in their community. Let's say like, I don't know, their relatives happens to be the mayor or something. So a lot of people will know them in that community. But then, like he said, if you take them out of where they're originally from and put them somewhere else, will they have the same impact? That's something that you have to consider for their background. And then there's also like more than that, maybe they have connections with popular people, so they just happen to have more face time outside of their performance, outside of their athletic performance. Is that something that you would factor into their fair market value just because they have more face time in the media? And sometimes these student athletes, they go viral on social media for things that are totally not connected to their performance. And so is that something you would factor in their fair market value?
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, and then to build off that, like in the background instance is for smaller schools in particular. Like I went to Reno, and football players or basketball players who are from the city of Reno gained a lot more popularity in the area because the school was more prone to pushing them out, being homegrown athletes, whereas kids, who they took from across the country may not have been as, highly talented. So it's just one of those things where there's so many different factors that can go into the fair market values for that school and for that player that there's probably going to be a list of, I mean, that's very long for an arbitrator to have to go through to figure out, like, okay, is this the fair market value of this athlete to this school? I mean, I think there's two parts of it too. It's how much the school values him or her, and then how much he's worth just independent of that.
Okay, so we have two other students in the class. What did you two find out about fair market value? Good job.
Hi, I'm Monica. My, I guess, challenge or concern with fair market value with college athletics is the female representation and going and talking about that and what is a female athlete's value in other sports like volleyball and tennis and gymnastics and golf, and how do you compare that with like male athletes that maybe do the same thing? And it's kind of just like, yeah, you can look at different metrics, especially in the NIL space with social media. I mean, I had experience with it because I did athlete, I guess, influencing and stuff like that, and they're doing business deals the second that NIL law passed, and they could get that money using their own brand. And there's a lot of things that you look at. There's a lot of things like I managed a basketball college athlete, which is huge in Berkeley, and then you look at managing a softball girl in Kentucky, and she has 20,000 followers versus this girl that has literally 1 million followers.
Okay, so what did you see in that representation? What was the difference in what they would receive?
So I think generally what I saw when I looked at the numbers is, yes, that basketball player at Berkeley got 1 million followers, she has a lot of interactions, she has a lot of fans, all that kind of great stuff, a lot of deals. A lot of people want her to, take pictures with shoes and Nike and et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at the female softball player, which is, you're comparing basketball and softball now, and you're comparing California and Kentucky. So you're talking about two different locations, you're talking about two different sports, and two different personalities too. And we're talking about a 1 million basketball player, she's also a model. So, and then you have a Kentucky softball player that she's more family oriented. She really likes to talk to little girls and mentor them. So they're two different things. So you have to look at, yes, it's like a totality of circumstances where you have to look at everything, like they said earlier, and looking at the numbers and what is working, what is not. So that's the Berkeley girl. Her audience was more so, yes, younger girls, but also men that think she's so cool because it's basketball. Yeah, there's men who watch basketball at Berkeley and they love it. It's huge. But then you look at her fans in softball Kentucky, and it's literally little girls, families. It's very just different. So you look at that, you look at the numbers, you look at the engagement, you look at their personality. So I think going into defining that is more the person, like where you are, what the sport is. But I also think when you're also comparing female athletes and male athletes doing the exact same thing, I think if a male golfer is getting $10,000 for a deal and a female golfer is getting less than that for doing the exact same thing, for having the almost exact same personality on social media and doing generally the same thing, I think they both should be equal in a sense, and they should be both making the same amount of money, regardless if they're male, female, whatever. So it's a tricky situation looking at it, but unfortunately, I mean, it's reality where like social media plays a really big role in, looking at sports and like who you follow, and you want to see somebody that looks like you and like represents you. And there's like when I was talking to this softball player from Kentucky, and she's Black and she's first generation in her family to be an athlete, so she's just doing all these amazing things and inspiring people, and she might not be getting the same amount of deals as the Berkeley Cal basketball player that has 1 million followers, and she's a model, and she also has a father that played basketball at Berkeley. So those are just like two different things, but it's reality. But I would like to think in a great world we can be fair. But I guess, it's just, it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, so you've experienced it, you've been working on it, so you understand that there is different value, and this is where the arbiter, whoever this is on these deals, is going to have a hard time.
Yeah.
Because you're right when you say if somebody has 1 million followers on social media and somebody else has 20,000, what if somebody has no followers? I know some athletes who really don't like social media. They don't like it. They don't want to spend time on it. Are they still... What is their worth in the market?
I think there's still opportunity there, but maybe not in social media. I mean, there could be, it depends. I don't know what they would be interested in as far as, making, getting NIL deals in that regard. But I think social media is pretty big, and, that's, and coming with like AI, which is a completely different conversation.
Oh yeah. We
but,
AI. Yeah, it could be a whole nother.
Yeah, so I mean, I just feel like combining those two, I feel like if you don't float and you don't, do all the things that everyone else is doing, you may not get that same payout, but it just a matter of what your goals are as an athlete. Like, what do you want to do? I mean, if you want to, have a social media presence, then maybe get a social media manager, or get like somebody else, like somebody else mentioned about getting like a third party to like manage the metrics and figure out what could be your value based on your personality, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and that's originally what this all was supposed to be, okay? But then these collectives got created, which was created by the adults, by the way. This is not anything to do with the student athletes, but the collectives really are the people, I feel like, were doing more of the pay for play, not the legitimate. I have 1 million followers. I'm a model. I can really I'm back to my crumble cookie deal again, where I can go over to Crumble Cookie with the cookie and, look, we've got this kind of cookie this week and you ought to buy it, right? And I have 1 million followers. What is your return on investment? I don't know, right? I don't even know. How does Crumble Cookie figure out how many cookies were sold because the $1 million, million follower, and where are her followers if it's a local business?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
So go ahead and introduce yourself, and what are you going to talk about with fair market value?
Hi, my name is Mahima, and I kind of focused my research more based off of evaluating fair market value of college athletes when it comes to issues with Title IX.
Okay.
And so, but really quickly, I kind of wanted to respond to what you said about how collectives can, for example, try to justify their contributions. And touching based off of what Jennifer and Zach spoke about earlier, there are some non-social media based ways to evaluate. For example, they can place a monetary value on specific performances. So let's take tennis, for example. They can try to evaluate based off of like a certain price point per point they scored, or how many games they played, or how many championships they won, for example. And even more so, it's like revenue based with these sporting events. Like how much have they gotten in ticket sales, for example, and maybe compare that to previous years, previous games, or even compare it to student athletes at other schools playing similar games. How much have they brought in? And kind of trying to understand. I mean, it's never going to be an exact number, but it could help you at least try to determine how much of our revenue is because of our students, just
Right.
so they could try to find some way to justify how much they're doing and try to stay away from being accused of pay for play.
Well, what do you think about the Title IX situation?
So the Title IX situation, I think our main concern is, as Monica kind of mentioned, it is a little difficult to evaluate and to try to make it even, because a lot of our male-dominant sports, they tend to get more viewers. That's what the statistics show. And so when trying to pay female athletes equally, I think realistically the most even, quote-unquote, way to do it would probably be based off percentages of revenue that they might get. That way there could be less of a chance of being accused of gender bias.
What kinds of problems do you think a university could have with Title IX, though, if they don't pay? Let's say you have a men's volleyball team and a women's volleyball team, and you have a men's basketball team and you have a women's basketball team. If you don't, what do you think that's going to create a problem if you give them a different amount of revenue?
It could be, but I also think going based off of revenue, once again, it's how popular is a sport in a sense. Are you finding an equivalent female sport that is as popular as an equivalent male sport? Because the bottom line is you have to try to find some sort of equivalent on both genders to be able to fairly say, like, I am paying them fair market value. Yeah.
Any other points about fair market value that you guys want to talk about? Zach, you look like you have something you want to say.
Oh, I mean, I will say that it's been a topic that a lot of people are writing about right now. I mean, and honestly, people have been writing about it for the last 3 or 4 years, which has been interesting to me considering how new this stuff seems to be. And it's interesting that nobody seems to have a firm grip on it. It's.
Do you want to know why?
I'd love to.
I'll tell you why. Because fair market value could be whatever somebody's willing to pay you to push their product, whatever it is. If I feel like you as an athlete, like you said you played baseball, could possibly be a great ambassador for my company, and my company sells some kind of like, let's say you're just gonna, let's say it's just a clothing brand that's the local store. And, you know, I'd like you to come in a couple times a week and I want you to wear my clothes, you know, from my store so that you can bring in other student athletes or other, you know, students at your school. And I want to pay you $500,000 to do that because I think I'm going to get $500,000 of sales. I mean, who's to say that that's not fair market value? That's what's so hard about it. It's what, because people say, well, how do you know what an endorsement deal's worth? Well, whatever they're willing to pay my client. Now, this was before this collective situation, okay? Because originally, that's not what this was about. This was about the legitimate deal. I have this many followers on social media, and I'm willing to pay you this much to this many tweets, because somebody did research in the class yesterday about if you have $5,000 followers, you were worth a certain amount. What was that?
I think the amount of followers was 200.
261,000.
Yeah, and then the amount per post was 500 to 5,000.
Depending on engagement.
Okay, repeat that again.
So the follower amount was 261,000.
So if you had 260,000 followers on social media,
A sponsored post could be anywhere from 500 to 5,000.
okay. So at least that's what the market was, let's say, yesterday, whoever looked it up, I don't know. So that's where it's like such a difficult thing to define, which is why in the arbitration system it'll be difficult, because there are some people who do not do a lot on social media. What about a high school kid who doesn't have any social media following, and the minute they go to Ohio State or Michigan and they get 500,000 new followers just in a day because they are now at Michigan as a student athlete. But before, maybe when they were offered a deal, that wasn't the case. So how do you justify that? Because that's you're now aligning with a different brand, okay? Your brand, your name, image, likeness is now aligning with a bigger brand. Yet the deal was done before you were a member of the bigger brand.
So when we were talking about this topic before the podcast, we were wondering, it would be the arbitrator or the arbiter who determines whether or not it is fair market value, right?
The arbitrator is going to determine whether there's a valid business purpose.
Oh, okay. That's the part.
Versus pay for play.
The valid
Okay.
business.
I think somebody like a basketball player who has 1 million followers that's a model can justify a much bigger amount than somebody who has no social media followers. You know, players don't even play, but they get deals.
We will continue next week with the implementation of the House versus the NCAA case, and we will talk further about how to get your student athletes involved. If you are someone who wants to be a sports agent, or you are you're a coach who needs representation, an athletic administrator, or media, please go to my website at jillmcbridebaxter.com and set a meeting with me. If you want to buy my book, you can go to borntobeasportsagent.com, or you can purchase it on Amazon. Have a great week. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Representation Without Taxation. Simply stated, I am always and forever about 3 things: protection, advocacy, and trust. To learn more about my fair fee structure, please visit my website at jillmcbridebaxter.com. If what we were talking about strikes a nerve, please subscribe and definitely share it. Until next time, it doesn't matter what the plan is, as long as you have one.